Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to F12, Building a Bridge Between Design and Operations, a workshop. You may be wondering where our instruments are. So there will be no music today. But it's great to see the turnout here. I think you're in for a really good workshop. 2 o'clock in the afternoon is the perfect time to do something more active. So what we're going to be doing here is some brief presentations, and then we're going to have some breakout sessions. So you're all around the table. We've got paper to work on, and we're looking for actually your creative talent and your experience to help guide this effort to bridge between design, construction, and operations. So why don't we get started? The learning objectives, hopefully you read them. That's why you're here, because you said this is something I want to be involved in. So really working on describing the gap between, the existing gap between design, construction, and operations and maintenance, integrating operations and maintenance into the design phase, and integrating design team into the operations and maintenance phase, and then understanding how owners, tenants, building occupants can be included in all stages of this process. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And so we have an agenda we're going to be going through again, some presentation, and then we're going to put some questions out for you to respond to, and then we'll go through the rest of the agenda. I'm Ralph Dunal. I'm Chief Executive Officer of New Buildings Institute. We're located in Vancouver, Washington. We're a think tank focused on commercial building energy efficiency. So we do research, we develop tools and solutions, and we do codes and policy work. And we work all over the US and also internationally. So I'm here to moderate this session and work with our fellow panelists, and they're going to introduce themselves. Alicia?
Hi, my name is Alicia Daniels-Ulig. I'm an architect at GGLO. We're a multidisciplinary design firm based in Seattle, Washington.
Hi, I'm Clayton Ulrich. I'm Senior VP of Engineering for Hines, an international real estate firm. Probably 1,200 projects, 240 million square feet currently managed. And so I'm on the operations engineering side, leading our 1,000-plus building engineers.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Pedersen, and if you looked at your program, you notice I'm not on it. I'm subbing for Mark Frankel, who couldn't be here today. I'm an architect and director of our Sustainability Resources Group at Sarah Architects, and I'm pleased to be here to share my story about how operations made a big difference in design.
All right. So, sorry, Lisa. So who's in the room? You're probably used to hearing this question in every session. And so we'll start with the kind of the usual suspects. Who in the room is a developer? Okay, there are 3 of you. Thank you for being here. Who is a owner, a building owner of all types?
Okay.
Great. Okay. Architects. Okay. Engineers. Wonderful. Contractors. Good. Manufacturers. Okay, we have 1 token manufacturer. Who am I missing? Building operators and facility managers. All right, let's give them all a hand.
Wait, yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we have a really good, even distribution. We were actually thinking about moving people, but that would be chaos. So we're glad that there's a good distribution here, and we have great representation, it looks like. So what I'd like to do is set the context for this discussion. So we have made dramatic improvements, I think, in energy performance of buildings over the past 45 years. So there was a time where there were no energy codes, and we've really made great strides, and codes continue to increase. Incentive programs are driving efficiency, and REACH codes, which we get involved in developing in different states, are really helping to push things forward. We actually hear from utilities and folks that are implementing these programs that they're running out of savings opportunities, right? Changing light bulbs or putting in a new water heater is not really getting the savings that they need. So there's a need for more integration and a real focus on operations and maintenance, and also occupant engagement in this process. And we know that the codes have been on this trajectory. It's exciting to see that this is tracking pretty well with trying to get to 2030, right? So getting to net zero by 2030. But what we also know, and from our research, is that there's a range of actual outcomes and they can be all over the map, right? So buildings can perform better than code and quite often worse than code and not even be compliant with code. And that's a big concern. And so the question is why is that happening and what can we do to solve that? So a groundbreaking study that NBI did back in 2008, and you may be familiar with it, basically demonstrated that program-wide energy modeling turns out to be a good predictor of average building energy performance for the sample set that were surveyed. However, with the other metrics in the study, there was a wide scatter among individual results. So some buildings do much better than anticipated. On the other hand, nearly an equal number do worse, sometimes much worse, sometimes twice as much energy as predicted. So how do we deal with going from modeled performance to actual performance and getting those performance outcomes? Just a diagram out of the study showing this kind of sample set of buildings that had been predicted to have low energy use, but actually did not, sometimes greatly exceeding that energy consumption. And also, I think this might not be unfamiliar territory for those of you in the room. What we hear about buildings that are going from basically completing construction, the keys are handed over, and then the building is operating, that it's difficult to connect design to operations, that the components don't operate as they're designed, right? That operators sometimes turn systems and functions off. And that clients might be supportive in design, but they don't really want to think about or worry about operations. They're focused on doing their business. And so these are all things that we're seeing, we're hearing over and over again in the industry. How many people have had this experience or heard these things? So, yeah, pretty prevalent. So that's, again, what we're trying to solve for here. And in our work, we've been very focused on really going beyond incremental savings to looking at net zero buildings. And this is really, a nascent but really growing wave of development. In fact, in our studies between 2012 and 2014, we saw more than a doubling of net zero buildings, 160 buildings across the US that are either achieving and verified for a zero net energy or are on target for that. And so this is, again, I think a crucial concern is how do you get buildings to actually operate at or better than net zero? And what we found is that when we check measured performance, these buildings can use energy, so we're looking at energy use intensity. Compared to the national average, these buildings are using sometimes a quarter or a fifth of that energy. So we find that net zero buildings have an EUI from 0 to 40, with the average being about 21. So these are high performance buildings, and you can imagine when you get down to low energy use like that, you have to be really careful about operating those buildings effectively. So what we're proposing is that there's really a needed evolution in our industry, really to think about the design team, the construction team, and recognize that there's currently a gap between those folks that are designing and building buildings and those that are operating them. And what we want to do is we want to bring the facilities team into the design process. We want to bring the design team and construction team into the operating process, and we want to close that gap. So that's kind of the premise that we're talking about here. So with that, we're going to jump into our first breakout. And so we've got, 30 minutes?
25.
25 minutes. Okay, so we've got about 25 minutes, and we want to basically have you respond to these questions and really have a brief summary of your thoughts about this. When we successfully bridge between design and operations, what will the outcomes be? So what are the measures of success we're really looking for if we actually ideally achieve this? And what needs to change? How do things need to change from what we do today? So those are really our questions. We're going to leave them up on the screen here. We're going to walk around and respond if you have questions of us. But the idea here is to really spark some conversation and start to be thinking about what success would look like. We're going to actually hand out some flip charts. You can use this paper on your table just for scribbling notes, but we want to actually record on these flip charts so that we can take them back with us and put this all together. Any questions before we get started? All right, well, let's get started. So let's wrap up the conversation. We'll have more time to talk a little bit later. So was that a good conversation? Did everyone get something out of that? I think we're realizing, that the brains in the room are out here, maybe not as much here, or here. So we're looking forward to hearing what you were talking about. And it's obvious, it was really pretty lively. So thank you, first of all, for diving right in, because you clearly kind of jumped on this and got to work and started recording. So what we want to do is kind of try and summarize. There's no way we're going to go through 18 tables reporting out. So we're going to try and do this in a way where we can kind of capture the important highlights of the discussion, because we'll have your recorded pages to take with us. So Lisa here is going to do some recording. Who would like to start? We'll start with maybe this first topic. What would the outcomes be if we really were successful in bridging between design and operations? What are some of the highlights? Okay, I heard comfort.
Getting operations people involved early on as part of the decision making without promises.
Yeah. So you get them involved early on, and then what happens because of that?
You would understand more from their day-to-day aspect, because they're going to have to run that equipment.
Yeah.
The designer and everybody walks away.
So they'll have a better the designers will have a better understanding of how things need to run.
How they
right?
need to run and what they are capable of handling.
And what they're capable of handling. That's good. Okay. So that's good. Anyone have something different than that?
That the facility management department is actually given the amount of money they need to operate the building properly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe in this ideal world you're thinking of, that the facilities team would actually be, welcomed and well-funded. Okay, that's good. Over there.
I think overall it would be a less litigating and less confrontational society.
Yes, less litigating, less confrontational. I think you hear of people saying you just don't want the phone to ring, right? Like you don't want to get that call. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people who design and build buildings, they basically don't ever check back in, right? And then they sometimes get the call, sometimes they don't. It was very interesting. I was in an interview with a team on a project, and the interview team basically said, first question, you designed the building across the street from where we're going to build this building. How's it doing? And the jaws dropped to the floor, right? So this is actually a real problem, right? And so the people who are not really paying attention to how buildings are operating may not get rehired. I think I'll keep my opinions to myself. We'll talk about this later. Okay, over there.
Well, to speak towards your graphs, the building might be run more efficiently compared to how it was designed because there was collaboration on what the type of equipment was and how it's going to be used.
Yeah, so that anticipated outcome may actually result in a real measured performance outcome, right? Or better. Yeah. Over here.
So fewer changes, change orders, perhaps.
Yep, fewer changes and change orders, right? Yeah, this is true integrated design and operations.
We came up with might create some lasting relationships on the
So that's what I was going to say that I stopped myself. So yes, this is actually a really brilliant idea for design professionals to continue work with their client, right? And make sure they have happy clients, and it builds their reputation for being really good practitioners. Yeah.
You said that basically the outcome should be to have it as part of the contract for the follow-up.
Yes.
To the design team being able to evaluate the outcome, fixing them out, and
Right.
change, but make it a part of the contract so that people, once everybody finishes, everybody's out of there, they've been paid, and put it as part of the contract.
This ongoing engagement as part of the contract. Good. You're getting ahead of us, but that's good. Okay. Yeah.
Fewer post-construction change-outs. So for facility groups that do have funding, what you'll see is if they don't feel like they were part of the process,
Right.
You actually waste
Right.
more money after the fact, and it's coming out of the same budget at the end of the day, but
Yeah.
same department, real estate.
Yeah, so there's this kind of saying that goes, people help support what they help create, right? So if they're actually brought to the table, this is what we call stakeholders, right? So they have a stake in the success, right? So you're bringing them in early, the ones who will actually operate that facility, and therefore they're not going to make these changes because they understand why everything is the way it is in the project. Yeah, good.
I think, and I want to repeat this whenever Ted maybe, but keeping designers involved in the project longer. One way we found to do it, because the AAA contract's going to take a while, how we found to get that changed because of the litigious nature of it. We've been doing post-occupancy evaluations and paying for them, and basically third-party post-occupancy evaluations.
Okay. So you're an owner.
No, I'm an architect.
You're an architect,
So
and you've been paying for them.
Has been paying for them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, for one, it keeps us involved with the owner. It's good.
Right.
And it lets us know what we're doing wrong, so we can fix it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Anyone else? So I listened to some really loud music last night, and I didn't hear you because I've lost some of my hearing. Could you say that again? Right, yeah. So you can actually have a lower cost in operations and maintenance over time. Okay, so how do we define success? So we want to move on to that. What would these outcomes be?
Benchmarks, goals.
Right. Clearly defined benchmarks, metrics, and goals. Right, so at the beginning? Yeah. And then those are verified, right?
Numbers, targets.
Yeah. And that is something that can be, checked in along the way, right? So you're checking progress. What else? What are some? Yes, okay, that's good. So actually, the end users, tenants, occupants, and the operators are more satisfied with that facility. Yeah.
Through an integrated approach, everybody walks away after the project's finished, regardless of how much money they last, with an increase in awareness so operations up to design more mechanical more.
So that going through this integrated process, everyone's going to kind of understand what everyone else's kind of responsibilities are and why they do what they do. And so there's much more of a kind of a friendly relationship among all those players. Because right now, I mean, we heard someone say, it's more adversarial and potentially litigious. Yeah.
Building on that all team members can actually describe the building system. So that it's not
Right.
just the designers who can.
Yeah.
It's the operators and everybody involved. So everybody's
Yeah. So everyone understands how all of the components of the building. Yeah. What other successful outcomes? I think about insurance companies. What are they concerned about? Liability, risk and liability, right? So owners are concerned about risk. Insurance companies, liability. Do you think this would be beneficial in that respect? No. No? Oh, you're being facetious?
They're just going to add in scope to cover their butt.
Okay.
It's not going to help your building at all.
Okay.
The premium's going to stay the same. It's going to lower their risk profile and their stokes.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So she's a little cynical about whether this will actually, it's practical. Okay. That's good.
But look at their first outcomes.
Happy. Yeah, their first outcome is happy. That's good. Okay. Happy brokers, happy occupants. Good. Yeah. So it's more profitable for everybody. That's good. Okay. Any other outcomes that we think? Yeah.
Sort of bridging on all this, the owner project requirements needs to be expanded from just physical to operations and construction.
Yeah.
And to include a quality process for all of the steps, including operation, at the beginning of the job.
So much more comprehensive, so I think, when I think about some of the great things that LEED has brought to the building industry, one of them is owner's project requirements, right? Which is a term I think now everyone is familiar with. And so how you define that, how LEED defines that, you're saying could be expanded to be much more comprehensive and really talk about having an actual process for making sure those outcomes are verified, right? And all the way through operations. Good. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay, and then, so I think we've kind of covered what needs to change.
Yeah.
Is there, on this one specifically, what needs to change, right, from current practice? Not to say that everybody's doing things not so well, but what are the kind of the main things that really need to change from current practice? So we heard, and I think this is really true, like AIA contracts. That's a challenge right now, right? Because contracts basically define what our responsibilities are and what we get paid to do and what we're liable for. So what needs to change in the process that, if you have anything to add?
They need to include operations and maintenance contract.
Okay. Include operations and maintenance plans in the design contract? Is that what you're saying? Okay. Yeah.
Actually, I was going to say maybe the LEED scorecard. The current scorecard, you get points for having a lead AP on the project. You get points for bringing in a commissioner, but nowhere in there do you see anything about getting any points for bringing in like a certified facilities manager for the entire process.
That's good. Okay, so the LEED process could actually give credit to projects for having that facilities team or a consultant involved in the design process, right? That's good. Yeah.
We talked about getting the O&M people into the room at the beginning of the project and then letting the design professionals continue to work with the O&M staff through the first year of the project.
Yeah.
So we're running it in so that you're there to be able to tell the story behind the design.
Yeah.
That is not necessarily apparent in training sessions from the contractor or there's just a disconnect there in terms of the continuity.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Project management methodology.
Okay, so
In other words, we've been building buildings the same way forever. And if you look at the IT space, there things like agile methodologies, different things like that, where stakeholders are included and empowered to make decisions on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
And those kind of things. That sector is moving forward in project management to deliver projects faster and without mistakes, but yet we're still using the same old forms and things like AIA, all that from 5 years ago, and it just hasn't kept up.
So what you're saying is maybe we could look outside of the building industry for models, maybe not only theories of change, but actually project management methodologies from IT or other industries. Or industrial.
Engineer, procure, and construct.
Right.
So that you can account for modern issues and technology.
Right.
You're not designing an automation system based on technology that you learned about last year. It's going to be applied 3 years from now.
So you're saying industrial process and method is something that's a model that could be used. Yeah.
EPC, engineer, procure, and construct. So they're long life cycle lead items. You design those early, and then your short life cycle, your short lead items, you design those later on. You get construction going early. You construct and design at the same time. You deliver. And
Great. So that's a prime example. Yeah.
I was going to add to what you said about facility managers getting involved early on. I think one of the key things in having that person involved early on would be they could make sure, because they're going to take possession of the object, the building at the end, is for them to make sure all training is done. Not just the mechanical side, the commissioning tends to do it, but I look at from a design background as well, how to maintain the floor. It's just a simple thing like that, but it fails not due to the architect's great choice. It's because the owner didn't maintain it the way it was supposed to. They took that systems manual or that O&M manual and they threw it on the shelf and it's already just collected dust.
So it sounds like what you're saying is a much more comprehensive approach to training the people that are actually operating the facilities and the occupants as well, right? Is how they operate and how to do that well.
We talked a lot about life cycle costing because the facility managers don't end up with the information they need to be able to budget or ask the people in charge for more money to operate the building once the building comes up. obviously
Yeah.
I have cost issues with my facilities. So that if we are doing life cycle costing, it has to have the line about O&M of annually this is what you're going to have to spend. In 10 years you're going to have to spend this. 20 years this. So the facility manager can then go ask the C-suite for more money. You know, because in educational institutions, nonprofits, it doesn't happen. They don't change the budgets, and you're just totally screwed.
Yeah, so in this process, life cycle costing would really help to rationalize that operating cost. And you know, there is this, you know, there's several kind of entrenched things in our industry, and one of them is, you know, capital budgets and O&M budgets, and that, you know, never shall they meet.
All of these things would get answered if you had a client that wanted to do it.
Yeah.
So you need to turn the dream client.
Okay, so having the client that would do it is going to solve this, but having actually a written kind of protocol or methodology is also needed, right? I think last comment, and then we'll move on.
Our team was really focused on was staff turnover. It's not what needs to change, that is the change that's the most difficult to
Yeah.
do, whether it's the owner side or the design side or the facility side. Same guy who started the programming meetings, not the one doing construction administration. Project managers change in construction, and then facility staff are constantly educated, or people who are knowledgeable about that particular technology are not there, or even if they're there, they go to the next company which
Right.
pays them more.
Right, so the staff turnover is a big challenge because you could invest a lot in having them participate in design or even train them as a facilities operator, and then they're off. So, good. So we're going to move into the next session. That was fantastic. Thank you. Maybe a round of applause for all of you. All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Alicia.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is great. I've been asked to speak today a little bit from the designer's perspective. So speaking as an architect here, I think you've already hit on a lot of good issues. And so as you chose this session, it should come to no surprise that our industry is absolutely not set up to connect designers and occupants. And I think we've heard a little bit about that in the things that we specifically wanted to change. In the traditional project delivery, our relationship as designers is with the development and owner team. Where is the operational team, even within this diagram? Where are the tenants? Where are we getting our feedback from? Think of an energy modeler that might actually be a subconsultant of an engineer, as a subconsultant to an architect. That's through the contractual relationship with the development team. And it's very disconnected if there is any kind of relationship there at all to get that feedback. The integrated project delivery method is helping a little bit better. It's bringing more collaboration in early, but that's really, again, the design, construction, development side of things. And I think we've all talked about this disconnect and this gap for the feedback. So in our own firm at GGLO, due to the lack of feedback, in 2005, we started our own internal post-occupancy research to really go back and see how our projects were performing, and are those predictions actually working once they are constructed, and really start filling that gap with some quality feedback. So since 2005, we've looked at approximately 13 projects representing 50 buildings, predominantly, but not exclusively, affordable and market rate urban housing. And we really wanted to look at conventional versus green. So this was back in 2005 when we were really getting started with this. There was the discussion, is LEED appropriate for all project types? We wanted to look at tangible metrics. Specifically, we were collecting gas, electricity, sometimes steam, and water utility data, and looking at predicted versus actual performance. We wanted to know what design measures were really cost effective, particularly for our affordable housing clients, And then the 2030 Challenge was launched shortly after we began this effort, and we really wanted to compare where are we in relationship to the 2030 Challenge and how far do we have to go. So while this session isn't on the details of that research, there were really the findings from that post-occupancy evaluation pointed to 3 major components for energy efficiency, and we'll get into these a little bit later as well. Design features. We know that things like envelope and mechanical systems, they affect energy efficiency. We know operations, we've heard of some of replacing systems by the facilities team if they don't have the buy-in from the beginning. Or maybe it's something like you go out in the field and you find economizers that are working 100% outside air 100% of the time. That might affect energy efficiency just a little bit. And then tenant behavior. Buildings don't use energy, people do. And we design for the human experience, and we need to know how that design is affecting people's use of these places. So as I mentioned, the 2030 Challenge was launched shortly after we started this research. And for those of you who might be a little less familiar with it, it is a bold goal to reduce fossil fuel energy use in buildings when it was launched by 50% with incremental reductions to reach carbon neutrality by 2030. And the American Institute of Architects has since launched the 2030 commitment. The 4 major components of that commitment, and I actually see a bunch of firms in here that I know are signatories of that. We could talk about those details a little bit more, but really it's based in two categories. You have internal practice. What are we actually doing within our firms, which is actually great to start looking inward. But I think the part that people know a little bit more about is the project commitments, and that's reporting annually progress on projects that we're designing that are on the boards, and how are we doing for projected energy consumption there. So I'd like to talk about just what the snapshot of the profession is. And for those of you who are signatories, if looking at your entire firm's portfolio, Lisa knows this well, not just the high performers, but everything that is on the boards is very introspective, very sobering. And we're actually finding that it's a great vehicle for creating a culture of performance, and it's really helping extend that discussion for designers beyond design and really start looking at performance, operational performance. So if your firm isn't signed on, I would encourage you to do so. It's a great tool as a vehicle for change. So we have a lot of architects. Over 80,000 are AIA members, and those members, over 17,000 own firms. You may not know that the vast majority of AIA firms are actually sole practitioners. And yet there are only 289 firms that have signed on to the AIA 2030 commitment. So we have a long way to go. This is a great tool that maybe some more firms should be using. 79 firms have reported their progress in 2013. And how are we doing compared to the 50% and 60% reduction? 35%, not bad, from predicted energy use intensity. 7 to 14% of those projects are actually meeting the 60% reduction. But the encouraging thing is 50% of us, of the projects, are actually modeling. So we have predicted energy use intensity to which we can compare actual performance. And we're actually collecting actual data, post-occupancy evaluation. This gentleman here said he's doing them on his projects for 45%. We expect that to actually be increasing with different policies throughout the nation. So there was a lot of discussion I heard in your breakout groups and reporting back that our traditional design process, it really does stop design, construction, and it doesn't just transition into the next. There is this gap to the occupancy. At best, it's that commissioning phase that maybe is that small thread that is providing some continuity. And while the integrated design process is really providing a little bit more collaboration, pulling some people earlier into the process, it still has this gap. But projects like GSA projects that we'll hear about, and projects that are using performance-based contracts are finding a way to what was on some people's wish list for change of pulling the operation and tenants back early into the process and extending the design and construction team later on into the operation phase. So it's no surprise that since our process isn't exactly ideal for what we want to see in outcomes, that there's really very limited tools in AIA contracts, and this came up. I was very happy to hear that. So if you weren't doing a post-occupancy evaluation like GGLO on our own research initiative, there's really only 2 places where you can find some help and use some model language. Integrated project delivery is, has a few more resources, specifically compensation for actual goal achievement, defining those project goals as a team. There was a lot of OPR and collaboration discussion earlier, working on those integrated scopes, and then in particular, what are the performance metrics? What are we actually going to be measuring and defining success at closeout? It's worth mentioning that 2 additional resources, the National Institute of Building Science, as well as GSA's facility standards, they highlight Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 for advanced goals that project teams can use and find what's appropriate for them. Maybe you want to be a Tier 2 for an envelope system, or thermal comfort is really important in your project, or daylighting, or whatever the specific issue is. I encourage you to look at these resources that can really help your team identify what is success on that project. So with that in mind, we're going to do our next breakout session. And we would really like your groups with in mind of what success looks like and the outcomes. Brainstorm a list of the top 5 most needed changes to scopes of work, tools and templates, or policies that we really need to get to this success. So we have,
I think we have
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Yeah. And
so we would prefer, we have a really good broad representation of attendees here. So we would prefer that you go deep on one of these topics. Don't feel that you need to hit all 3. Talk amongst yourselves, figure out where you have some commonality, and really dive into one of these specific areas.
Okay. So let's just take a survey here. How many of you focused on that first bullet, changes to scopes of work and contracts? Okay. Everything. Okay. Tools and templates. Good. And then policies. One table. All right.
And all.
People don't understand how sexy policies are. So why don't we start from the top and talk about what needs to change in scopes of work and contracts. And you can talk about this kind of abstractly, or you could be very specific about what those changes should be. So who wants to go first? All right.
We came up with an idea around a design and operations incentive agreement so that the design team and the operations team can basically earn a set-aside after a project is completed. It would be based on the OPR. The OPR would include some of the operations plan, and the data collection methodologies will all be defined. So you're setting that up as part of the design effort.
Right. Okay, so it's basically an incentive, like a pay-for-performance set aside for the design team and contractor to basically deliver on the owner's project requirements. And if they meet them, then they get that incentive. You can define that early, probably in the contract, right? So the original contract would actually stipulate what the performance metrics are and then how they're documented through what data. That's good. Yeah.
And just to expand on that, we put down a singular contract for all stakeholders for development. So on that team, everybody's on the same page going in. They all know what the end result will be.
So a singular contract making sure that all parties are part of this, kind of like integrated project delivery, but as Alicia said, kind of expanding it into this operations and performance. Include the owner as well, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that if you truly are doing integrated project delivery, you have a three-party agreement, right, with the architect, the contractor, and the owner. But it doesn't take it as far in terms of achieving that actual performance. That's an opportunity. Who else would like to go on this one? Yeah.
We wanted to make a change to the O&M manuals the contractors give us at the end, because to be realistic, facility managers are not going to sit there and read it cover to cover. We don't have time. So that if we had some cheat sheets on each section, not just the mechanical plumbing, but all of it, like the take care of the floors that we talked about earlier, stuff like that, and some bullet pointed items that we could sit there and read for 30 minutes, but then we're good. Because the O&M manuals, we really only look at them when we're trying to troubleshoot a problem when something's broken.
Okay, so
the only time we ever open them.
This is good. So really kind of changing the paradigm of what an O&M manual or training is like. And maybe we can kind of use that model of looking at other industries, right? For how do you, like, quick start guides and live trainings and things like that.
We're seeing a lot of spec requirements for videotaping.
Yeah.
And they'll use that and just fast forward.
So getting basically a digital recording of these O&M practices. Of the commissioning process, yeah.
Then they can just go to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been involved in projects where you basically have a live training during the commissioning process, having the facilities team there, but you record it, and then they could always refer back to it.
Include testing and QA of installed products and systems, like you have it in often in specs for concrete or roof, as discussed, but why not include it for everything?
So testing and quality assurance on all products installed? Okay, yeah.
In answer to this lady's question, this table, from the commissioning side, where I'm coming from, we do a systems manual at the end. And there is a section I do, a cheat sheet. It's like 3 pages long. It tells you all the maintenance on the mechanical, what you need to check off, whether it's an oil change or whatever, filter change. So and it's placed and you put initial and the date, and you can track it. So it is like
That's also assuming you do commissioning on
well, yeah. Industries that do it is what I was answering.
Right. So Cliff's notes for the systems manual. Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Something we had was, incorporating the operator and the end user into some sign-offs throughout the design process.
Oh, okay.
Oftentimes, that's part of the missing piece of the integrated design process. So I think the owner would be looked to, well, owner, when you sign off, you're de facto signing off for the operator.
So the owner and end user are actually signing off during the process, and in essence, kind of a peer review of the project going through. So when there's maybe an owner architect meeting, there would be some kind of protocol for that. That's good. Others? In the back. The electronic files for the design are the owner's property, and I know there's especially with BIM, you can actually start taking those into the O&M practice, right? So you actually have the design documents becoming part of the O&M practice. Yeah.
So we were talking about some sort of hybrid of a commissioning and ASHRAE audits where we would come out and do testing, generate a report, but then have a walkthrough, physical walkthrough with all parties to discuss the results of the report and what was working and what wasn't.
So combining the commissioning efforts with kind of an auditing process, like a ASHRAE walkthrough, that's good. Okay. Yeah, in the back. Okay, so what we're hearing here is that often the contracts are kind of one-sided, basically, and kind of all kinds of demands for the design team, but not so much for the owner. So you're saying maybe expanding that so that there's some actual technical requirements of the owner as well. Yeah. And that could be basically some model language or templates as we're thinking about. Yeah.
Increase the design team scope to include M&V.
Yes. Yeah, I think, I in a previous position, I did a lot of lead projects, and it was always interesting because, when you would say, are we doing M&V? They'd say yes, right? Check. But who's doing M&V? And how are we doing it? And yes, we have an M&V plan, but is anyone actually going to do that plan? And so actually making it, integral to the project. Who does M&V? What is the methodology? And how is it going to happen in operations? Yeah. So maybe a separate contract. Okay, so we kind of have been a little all over the map, but and how are we doing on time?
You need to move to the next one.
Oh, okay, good.
No, you're good. Keep going.
Yeah, so since we really only have one table on policies, do you want to just kind of quickly give us your short list on policies?
Oh, even better.
Yeah.
So main thing was policies are tied to owners. That's the only perspective that we took when we talk about policies. And it's typically tied to cost. No more of this because it costs $600 for liability or whatever. So too rigid processes is what we thought was the biggest concern. They don't want to deal with it. Here's a law, here's a policy, and follow it. What we saw would be good is we add O&M staff at conceptual stage as a policy. Design team involvement at the post-occupancy. Yeah, and then the way we can do that is lessons learned, talking about lessons learned from past projects during kickoff, and then obviously at closeout as well. The reason why we start with $3 signs is everything is cost. Anything that we suggest in any one of these things
is cost. Yeah.
Life cycle cost analysis. Thanks for bringing that up. To be part of the policy that it's in. It has to be ongoing, continuous improvement plan. Not only continuing commissioning, but improvement plans. When it comes to waste,
it's a much more
holistic,
inclusive term than just commission. Usually when you think commission,
Right.
you're thinking of energy, and that way we're including, you're looking at the waste fees, you're looking at
So really kind of whole building commissioning including all.
whole project, continuous improvement.
Yeah, great. And I think it's it's interesting. You brought up policies. Really, all are the implications of all of this are cost, and so I think for one thing we don't necessarily have good data on what the cost is for not doing this, right? But we have a sense that these costs of all these swings outside of expected performance really do cost a lot of money, and they cost a lot of money to correct. So I think there's going to need to be an argument made that while these things may seem to add cost, they're actually going to save cost, right?
Yeah, that's one thing. It's a small scribble on the side, but ROI, some things are tangible, some are not.
Yeah. So we didn't really dig into tools and templates. We covered it a bit. I'd like to do that briefly, but we need to move on with the program as well. So anyone have just a quick kind of pop up on tools or templates?
We started there because we thought everybody was going to improve. and then we just decided that the tools and templates are already there. We're just not using them. There's so many tools and templates out there that we could agree to use, and it had to be owner to agree to them or for us to agree, whatever contractually agree to them. And from ASHRAE to the 2030 challenge could be a tool or whatever. There's lots of things already out there, but I think we got back around to changes to the scope of work and project, which is the way that it seems like it's an ominous thing, but really we could, in supplementary conditions or where we could put that information and the owner could put it in. We could work with the owner to put that information in to make things
So overall, what you're saying is we have many of the tools that we need and the templates that we need, kind of the. But I might just maybe add to what you're saying or imagine what you're thinking or discussing there. That what we really need to do is bring alignment to these, right, and kind of put them in a place where they are all together, right? And it's not unlike what LEED is, right? I mean, LEED is basically a set of reference standards. So let's move on. That was great. I think give yourselves another round of applause. You guys are rocking. It's Thursday afternoon, and you're really still kicking it in. That's good. So I'm going to hand it over to Clayton, and he's going to give the owner's perspective.
So thank you. I mean, I'm pretty impressed. I figured it out, the answer. The answer is we just need to do all the projects that get done in the world, and the problems are solved, right? Unlimited budgets, full control, and it's all solved. Do me a favor real quick. Look at this list and just put yourself in one of these categories, because I'd like to start off with a quick thought about what you think. So if you're in development, call yourself an owner or a developer, raise your hand. So put your hand down when I hit your number. More than 50% of the projects are operated optimally. Less than 50%, more than 25%. Yeah, okay, I thought that. Design. How many's in design? How many think that more than 50% of the properties are operated optimally? How many think more than 25? Yeah, this is getting pretty consistent already. So construction. How many think that, let's just make this easy, how many think more than 25% of the properties are operated optimally? I hope y'all not blaming this on operators. So operations, how many do you think more than 25% of the properties are operated optimally? Energy efficiency practitioners, any? Do you think more than 25% are operated optimally? What the heck are we doing? How are we going to solve this, and why are we in this mess? Because y'all are all in trouble, and you just need to realize it. You're moving to a point where you're making more complicated product, you're turning it over to people that you're not involved in the process, and your future compensation and success is going to depend on their success, and you're leaving them out of the room. You're in deep doo-doo. So, this is pretty quick and easy. So development, there's some need. Development happens. Somebody starts as the developer. It's a corporate owner. And they realize once they get some kind of financial arrangement deal, they can't do anything without what? They got to have some design people. And it's interesting, they get to their party pretty quick, don't they? And then they get together and they say, well, we got this all figured out. We got this magical project, and we need somebody to build it. And so pretty quick, they come up with some construction folks. And you know what? This is the traditional party, isn't it? What's missing? Facilities and operators. And look how slow it takes them to show up. They're not invited. So look what happens next. It takes them a long time, a real long time, to figure out where they belong. Again, please?
That's how fast they do everything.
We got you outnumbered, and obviously your next project is going to be your last project, but thank you for the comment. So moving right along, what's wrong with status quo? Everybody in this room that's done anything with projects has had startup problems. You may not have known it, you may have buried it, and you may have left before we figured it out, but it exists. Operators excluded from the team, they don't take ownership. We don't know nothing but blame you after you leave. It's true. It's the reality, and it's your fault. Tenant experience may not meet expectations. Uh-oh. Now that gets around, and that really was your last job. Building performance falls short of models and projections. We are moving more and more into models and projections, and the success of the projects being measured by how they perform. And when they don't perform, there's going to be problems, there are going to be litigations, there are going to be people in deep trouble. And we can prevent it, so we should get busy. Cost exceeds projection, leases, allowance, representations, and court. It will happen. So, operators' potential roles. I want you to look at the operator's integration to what you do as somebody new and additional to help you get done what you all want to do. You all want to have great projects, don't you? There's no doubt in my mind. Who wants to be the guy or the woman that built the building that everybody talks about in the wrong way? Nobody. So we all want to do a good job. We just got to use each other and bring these people to the table and make them part of your team. They can do project review and monitor installation. There's no one better to help make sure your building gets commissioned right than the people that's going to own it after you leave. They have the vested interest in the best product being turned over to them. Quality control assistants, we got eyes on all four sides of our heads. I know you knew that all along because you didn't like us already, but we got it. Witness testing and commissioning, you don't want to do that. You really don't, do you? You don't have time for it. You got to go fix all those other things and build a new project. Establish long-term operations and manage warranty. Who manages warranty? You know who manages it? The contractor that doesn't do it. And we don't even know what it is. We are so thankful to find out you bought a 2-year warranty, but you never told us. You never told us that you bought an extended maintenance contract that we could renew each year on elevators for 10 years. Instead, we paid twice as much on year 2 as what if we'd have just known we could have got it for. And it's not our fault because we don't know. Maximize building performance. You really need us to do this because everybody's going to be watching with these new disclosure regs. Changing status quo. How are we going to change status quo? And I'm lucky. I am extremely lucky. I've been in business for 40 years. I've probably been involved with 1,000 different buildings. But I have an owner. My company founder is a degreed mechanical engineer. He's not a finance person. So he comes in loaded for bear and asking all kind of questions, and all we got to do is point to him, and everybody goes, ooh. We've got to engage operations from design through construction, through continuous improvement, and the good news is we're doing it now. And back to this graph. This is what I want you to leave within your head. Let's take the operations people and get them started in the beginning, and let's get a cycle going on. We've heard people talk about post-commissioning or post-occupancy evaluations. You can get it for free if you can get this going. And everybody that designs buildings wants the operators to tell them about that building because they need to know. Who wants to make the same mistake over and over again? And if you don't even know it's a mistake, I promise you're making it again. So changing status quo, you've got to get the right people. And you've got to empower them and make them part of your team. You can't put them in the corner, treat them bad, and not listen to them and call that success because you can check a box you got operations involved. That's not inviting them to the party. That's inviting them to clean up after the party. You've got to leverage operations in your field observations and the services and the startup and the commissioning. They can be an integral part of your team, but they don't show up to this new party of you people knowing what that's about. They really don't. They show up and join a team that's existed for a couple of years now and go like, well, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing here. You got to help them out. You got to support them too because you know what happens when we show up and we know it's wrong? We got to go tell somebody. And all of you have found out the easiest way to solve that problem is kill the messenger. It doesn't make you very popular and it doesn't make us talk very much and we're still back to talking about you after you leave. We tried to tell you, you didn't want to hear. So we're going to go find somebody else to tell. You know who we're going to tell? We're going to tell the tenant. And then they're going to tell the owner, and it's still going to be your last job. You got to include them in the projects, rewards, and recognition. No one likes busting their heinies on this jobs, doing this stuff, and feel like they didn't get invited to the top and out party, they didn't get invited to the bonus party, they didn't get invited to the bank. They didn't get to any of that. They're just the workforce. So I really think what I want to leave you with is you've got to engage your own wizard. I'm going to tell you, not everybody that's an operator is meant for this role, and so you better check them out and pick them very carefully to make sure you're going to be successful. They need to be a challenger. They need to be strong enough to stand up to the challenge. They need to be technically competent. They need to be what we would call technological professionals. They need all those management skills that you need, but they also have to have a solid, detailed understanding of the systems. So I think if you can get a wizard, he's right there. He's right there behind the curtain. All you got to do is find him. Please don't hire him from us. We don't have enough as it is. With that, I'm going to introduce Lisa.
Thanks, Clayton. I do need that. What I'm now going to do is take you through a project where we had the opportunity to take the design information that Alicia had talked about and incorporate them past construction, as well as involve the operators earlier in the design process to the success of the project. But before I do, I wanted to just start with this fun graphic. Have you ever felt like this, where you are really in the dark and you have no idea what your project's about, especially you operators? I can imagine that sometimes it feels like you're at one end of the elephant and you're trying to figure out what the whole thing is about, but you only got this small piece. And can you imagine that the guy who's feeling the trunk is probably not getting the same information as the guy who's feeling the tail? It's a sad state of affairs. So as we've seen the market progress, there's a lot of things that have been driven on the design side that have driven down performance. The idea of performance outcomes and increased data availability, better tools, improved monitoring, and even the design-build contracts. These are all the things that you guys had identified as the need for successes. They exist in the industry, and my project was lucky enough to incorporate all of those things. We also talked about how there's really a shared performance, responsibility for performance. Back in 2000, design components were about 50% of the overall energy use, with operational characteristics and tenant behavior being about a quarter each. Now, fast forward to where we are 2015 almost, design components are potentially driven down to a smaller portion. And what we're seeing is the bigger portion being operational. And why is that? Because we're making more complicated buildings, we're not including operations and maintenance in the design of the buildings, we're not providing manuals or cheat sheets. All of the things that we just talked about haven't caught up with the design profession. We're also starting to see more on the tenant behavior, but that's another aspect that needs to be perfected as we move towards the 2030 challenge. One of the things that's helped designers is increased data being available. There are now 17 states that have mandatory benchmarking or disclosure policies, and there's a large number more that are doing voluntary reporting. Over 2,000 buildings are reported in over 34 states. So that's a huge database that designers can now access through people like the New Buildings Institute. We need the same thing for operators. Ralph showed this graph earlier. One of the things, though, that we do need is to figure out why some of our highest performing designed buildings are some of those that are in that red circle. Is it perhaps about the operations, and maybe those are more complicated systems? Is it about the tenant behaviors, and maybe that's something that we aren't sharing a lot about? Maybe we need more monitoring that happens. I know one of the sessions I attended early on talked about the importance of monitoring to be able to achieve their net zero energy goal. And the fact that they were monitoring people at the plug load level, that enabled them to be able to achieve their goal. So in my project example, the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt Federal Building, which was completed last summer in 2013 and has just now finished its one-year commissioning and now is in its performance period. We had these 6 characteristics, and ultimately, I credit these things to being a success. First of all, a contract that defines shared risk. Okay, it was with the GSA, the General Services Administration, so legally we actually didn't have an IPD contract. We signed a AIA standard agreement, but we immediately put that contract off to the side, and what we did is we signed a one-page agreement. The owner, the project executive for the team, the general contractor, and the design professionals, my firm, Sarah Architects, all agreed to work in an IDP-like manner where we were getting to the table and rolling up our sleeves and agreeing to solve problems together rather than pointing fingers. Everybody just pushed their contracts aside and said, this is how we're going to run this project, and that's how we did it all throughout. We did extensive modeling to determine goals and likely outcomes. I will share with you, we had a little benefit in that this particular project was originally contracted in 2003, got put in the drawer because Congress didn't fund it, and then got resurrected under the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, and therefore was a shovel-ready project that already had a completed energy model, but needed to be redesigned to meet the Energy Independence and Security Act, which really was the next bullet point, a predefined indicator. We had an EUI, an energy use index, that we absolutely had to meet. It was a performance metric that everybody on the design team agreed to, back to bullet point number 1, and everybody on the design team said, that's what we're going to do. There's no value engineering because we need to achieve that particular goal. We also set a performance period. When is this building going to need to achieve that goal? We're allowing for a period of commissioning, and now we're in our one-year performance period. And then probably the most important thing was this idea of a no handoff. We're showing the illustration of a relay race, because a relay race, you have people running together. So the design professional is running together with the construction entity. Construction became involved early on in schematic design. We got the building operator involved while we were still doing the detailed development, even as the construction was happening. And our team was actually contracted to extend through this operations period. we had an executive that recognized the importance of keeping the design team involved and having us being part of the performance period to make sure that as we're studying the building, the operators had somebody to go back and ask questions to if they had any questions. So the building that would be on your right is the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt building. If Mark had been here, he would have been able to speak about the other two buildings, which I'm sorry, I don't know more about those. But if you want to know more about them, you should go to the nilbuildings.org outcomes seminar that occurred a couple months ago. And that's a videotape. But there's a picture of the Edith Green project. It's a 500,000 square foot federal office building located in downtown Portland, Oregon. It's a renovation project. It was originally designed in 1974 by SOM. And the project essentially was mandated by the federal government because it had a lot of outdated systems. It wasn't meeting ADA requirements. There were federal safety. It wasn't meeting blast resistance. And all of those type of things led to the ultimate resurrection of the project. And as I mentioned, when it got refunded through the Energy Independence and Security Act, that's when the high performance goals got added. And so ultimately, what I'm here today to talk about is how is the building actually performing. As I mentioned, we're through a year of occupancy. And so what this graphic is showing is what we've done through 8 months, essentially. So we haven't quite gotten the year's worth of data. So the original building, which is the one on the left, was the 1974 federal office building. It's a concrete skin building. And it essentially had an EUI of between 77 and 84 kilobTUs per square foot. If we were just designing the building to a typical code building, which originally was our goal back in the 2003, we would be reducing that to somewhere around a 40 to a 50 EUI. Our modernized building, in order to achieve the Energy Independence and Security Act, needed to be between a 30 and a 34 EUI. And what we're actually performing is within 1% of that overall target. It's actually a little bit less over the time period. So ultimately, I credit that with, one, having an owner who stood up and said, all of you guys are going to work together, and including me and my team, and actually had the guts to bring the operator on board early enough that the operator was involved in the decision-making process. What DDC control systems should we use? What smart building controls should we use? All those decisions, they were included. And then also including the design team after the fact, and essentially setting up a mechanism to pay for the design team. We are actually being paid for this through the incentive from the Energy Trust of Oregon. They were able to repurpose that incentive to then pay for continued energy modeling throughout the process. So Ralph, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Oh, I don't need that. Thank you. Great. So thank you all for your contribution, because NBI is actually in the process of developing a framework that would help to bring this continuity and streamlining of the process. So, so everything that you have shared, everything that you have contributed here, we'd like to see if we can bring that into this protocol so that the industry can have the benefit of actually moving from what is a fairly dysfunctional process to a much more functional and streamlined and performance-based set of outcomes. So, so we're looking for technical advisors to contribute to this, and we're also looking for pilot projects, projects that are timed such that we can actually start to try and put these protocols in place. And granted, there are a handful of projects that are already doing probably parts of this, but there are not there's not a vast set of projects that are doing it, completely. So, so anyway, we welcome you to be a contributor, and you can talk to me after the session. And we again thank you for your contribution. So, at this point, we would like to spend a little time doing maybe some questions and answers. We still have, I think, about 10 minutes to talk, and then after we break up the session, we're also happy to talk with you one-on-one. So, so I'd love to just get some feedback from you. How many of you feel like you learned something that you could take home and actually practice in your work moving forward? Great. Okay. So what, maybe some highlights. What, if you can share maybe a highlight that you think was really instructive and beneficial and that you want to bring into your practice.
I think it's good we're just having a discussion.
So, yeah, so it's good we're having this discussion. We had this conversation when we started this that, you know, it's you know, yes, it's good for us to share what we're thinking, and yes, it's good that you shared back. But the conversations that you had are probably the biggest takeaway from this that will actually start to, you know, infuse the industry with a kind of a questioning and an aspiration. So thank you for that.
Being in a group where the building operators outnumbered everybody else.
It's like that Visa ad, priceless. So, yeah.
And I'm in the design community, and you talk about a collaborative, you know, effort in terms of coming together and pulling together design that's all integrated. I think the lessons from today are all the little tidbits through the 2 hours have been that involves not just the owner, but also the operations stuff. That it's an entire collaborative process to step through it.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and I think you know that one bullet point, no handoff, right? Like, I mean, that maybe the relay race is not exactly an ideal metaphor, but the idea that there is just this kind of flow and continuity, right? And that everyone's in it together. Yeah. Anyone else?
From the city of Austin, I just had a conversation with the building services department, and they had comments about design action features. And project management group is a different department, so they didn't want to incorporate the comments of the building operator.
Oh.
And so I ended up saying to them, look, these are your clients. They're going to be using the building for the next 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you must incorporate it.
So you're.
Just raise the importance of the
Yeah. So were you talking about kind of the capital projects people seeing the operating folks as their clients, right? And so this is like a service to those clients. Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
One parallel that I saw on all the discussions was in our home, custom home, the homeowners are, you know, completely involved with the building of the house, whereas when you notice in the commercial building,
Yeah.
you're the last people to be included.
That's a good analogy to think about that in custom home building the owner and occupant is really involved throughout, and we don't do that in the same way with commercial buildings. Yeah.
It just sounds like the operations, the architects, the engineers, they all just need to be more upfront and honest with the clients or the owners. We need to say, the design people need to say, you need to get some O&M in here, or else this will never run right.
Right.
And the operations people need to be like, hey, you need to get us involved. We need to be talking to the design team. We need to convey what we've learned. Over our careers of managing buildings, we have information. We want to share that.
Yeah.
I think there isn't a room like this full of owners waiting to build projects, trying to learn how to do this. So we need to speak up to them.
Yeah. So the architects and engineers can be advocates for the operating team, the facilities team. Yeah. Yeah. And they can basically start to popularize this and get owners to agree that there's a value add here. Yeah. And I don't know, Clayton, I mean, do you think that's a hard sell?
Depends on the owner. You know, one of the challenges is going to be finding the right people. You know, there's a lot of operators that are great operators, but you're inviting them into a new world, and their skill sets are a little bit different. So it's going to be great when we get more of those people. The buildings are getting more complicated. You know, you used to turn over a building, and we used to run it in hand till you got the building finished. And that's not practical anymore. It's all done through software. And so what you're going to do if you don't do this different is you're going to open the building with no services. And that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. So questions? Yeah.
Well, I want to add on to what you're saying because you said something earlier about having the technical people there in the facility management, but it's the facility managers. We have 11 core competencies in our certifications. And so we know a little about a lot of different things because we have to do the high-level management. That doesn't mean we have the technical. We're not engineers. We don't necessarily know the nitty-gritty technical. That's why we hire people to work for us. So that doesn't mean that we have the people to be able to have a plumber, an electrician, a mechanic, all of those people, plus the facility manager on the team. So you have to kind of, the architects and designers, that's what we're looking for, is that technical knowledge, because we're going to have to manage, not necessarily do the technical work. So it's who, like you said, who to invite, but if you want the technical people, those are people that are further down the hierarchy, or do you want the manager that has to oversee everything? And that's, we didn't talk about that today.
Yeah, we're gifted a little bit in that we have a conceptual construction group, and their job is to do some of that, and then the engineers we hire bring a lot of the technical, and I don't think we're really expecting the operations people to bring the, if I will loosely call it the advanced detailed technical. We're asking them to bring their knowledge with them to be part of the team, to engage in the technical discussion. I had to be honest, I did this the first time in my life. I didn't get to start at the beginning, but I started a year before the end, and I was 24 years old on a 1.8 million square foot project in Minneapolis, and so I can tell you there's tons of differences, and there's tons of things that changed, and it can build a better product. It's, you know, every team needs a challenger. If you have 3 people that all think alike and there's no challenger, you missed half the world minimum. And yet a challenger has a little bit of a complex personality to be strong enough in his thoughts and opinions to even challenge the established team. He's going to be a little bit, they're going to be a little bit challenged to manage, but you need them.
The one thing we didn't talk about is, I think the key ingredient is facility manager is on staff, so they're getting paid constantly to do this project to show up. But the architect, the high-paid architect, I'm joking. The high, because you read statistics, and they're one of the least paid and have to know the most knowledge in their profession. But they, and the contractor, what's the incentive for them to come back? They want to get to the next project that puts dollars in their pocket to feed their family. You know, you don't go to the dentist and he works for free. So that's another thing you got to figure out how to do that.
They won't do it for free, and they shouldn't, because it won't be worth anything.
Right.
But they want the information because they want their projects to be better. And so I think when the owner and the occupant and the facilities group and the engineer and the architect all want to do this, they'll find a way to do it. You agree?
Well, I think one example that we used was to repurpose an incentive. And a lot of you probably have incentives in your states that usually happens at the end of construction. What happens to that money when you're doing a public building? It just goes back into a pot that then gets used for construction. Our project executive said, I want that money to go to my project to make my project better, and was able to convince the federal government to repurpose the money for design teams. So that's an idea. Use the incentive dollar.
Definitely. And then on the post-occupancy evaluation side of things, well, it might start as internal research, and I've talked to a few firms who are doing POEs. It might be more of a continuous client care at the beginning, but once you establish the value, then it becomes part of typical operations. So we identified a lot of things on our wish list and what success looks like. So I would challenge each of us in whatever discipline you're in to go back and, you know, fight for the collaboration and to integrate people earlier into your projects.
Any other last words from? I think we're going to need to close the session. So if you have more questions or comments, or you want to discuss, we'll be up here. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
For the panel.